Councillor Cummings.
I just wanted to very quickly seek a little piece of clarification just in terms of our council's budget setting processes. If we don't pass this budget this evening and we leave it open,
What happens?
yeah, because we're essentially leaving an open timescale. So I guess the question is that would we be in a better position just in terms of our own internal processes to approve the budget and then review it and underspend against it potentially? Or if we don't do it, what does that mean for any papers that go through our councils with an unapproved? Because this has got to appear as a line.
So if we don't approve it tonight, it reverts to the current budget of RPI plus 2%. So that's what you'll have in your budget line.
So the current budget is slightly more than that which we're proposing in this paper. You've tested me now. Yeah, so the current budget is 1.329, just over 1.3 million, and the proposed budget is a very small saving. It's 1.325 million. So it is a small saving.
Checking the process that what we're actually going to do here by not approving it is revert it to the previous budget plus RPI plus 2, which is going to mean that actually where this appears in our current paperwork within our councils at the moment, we're going to put a cost increase in. It may only be temporarily, but I'm just checking because we do actually have to reflect what we're doing here in our budget papers.
No, I appreciate that. But it'd still be quite the substantial amount of money you're putting into your budget for this anyway, would it not be?
Yeah, the movement in terms of.
Yeah, but isn't what we're saying that we want to? Your suggestion was 6 months, Chair, but then your suggestion was actually should we bring it, or was it your suggestion? Sorry, was to bring it forward sooner than 6 months, just to actually look at can we, what additional savings should we make? Are we content with the budget as it's itemized currently? I think my discomfort is essentially agreeing to it without having the knowledge that I've got about the rest of our budget, that it has been challenged, it has been I'm confident that it's robust and that there aren't additional savings that could be made.
The point is to try and reduce that figure by more.
I agree with that completely. I'm 100% on board with it. But if we go through a 6-month progress from this moment in time, when I set my budget for next year, the net result of this decision is going to be that budget line is going to increase at my budget setting for next year. And we have to set a balanced budget. I am going to have to find a saving from my council as a result of this decision.
So how quickly would you need to feed it in? Because when it's our gift to come back with those savings. Yeah.
I'm just sort of following through the process.
Sure,
here.
and I agree.
Yeah.
But I think actually then if we need to speed up that process and we need to understand what options we have quicker than in a couple of months' time, or
do on that type of timescale, or pass the budget that's in front of us today, but then review it in terms of the actual spend. And you could do it either way. But if in 6 months' time we're going to be in next year,
could you not, in the anticipation that we will come to this, put a saving against the SLWP partnership of the whatever it is, £4,000, £5,000 difference?
I would have to put in whatever the budget is that is assigned to this will have to be what goes into my papers. I can't change that.
To save, isn't it?
That's a really valid point, because basically if we don't approve the budget, the new budget will actually be significantly higher than what we've currently got. So I understand the point you're making, and it's quite valid. What our concern is that the budget hasn't gone through the challenge process. Now, I'm sure internally, you have challenged line by line, but we haven't done it ourselves. So the point is, I guess, how quickly can we do that challenge process so that we don't fall into the trap that I'm really sorry, Councillor Cummings has made.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So if we could do that challenge process relatively quickly, would that be helpful? Because ultimately then you maybe have a greater saving to put against your budget, because you wouldn't be going to the new one or this one. Hopefully it would be a reduction in what we currently have.
Within the timescales for us setting our budgets, that's fine, because then we would have a lower budget line which would go into our budgets for next year. My concern was that we were talking about a 6-month process that would actually increase the cost line I would have to put into my budget. So,
Councillor Lewis?
And again, just thinking it through, firstly, it would have to be done really, really quickly. And we're talking a matter of days, couple of weeks, probably maximum. But secondly, we would then need to bring it back to a formal meeting to approve it. And again, whether we can get that formal meeting in before we're in a position to approve our own council budgets.
Councillor Sweeney, sorry, I put your name wrong.
Yeah, I think having the point you raised, I could see within Howard Kingston. I think that the points you've made are valid, but I could see that given within Kingston, our budgeting process is effectively closed already. So I think that the way forward is we could approve this budget tonight, but with a fast track of reviewing and looking at it. I think just for technical reasons, that's probably the way forward, I think.
So Councillor Cummings, can I just to clarify, are you saying that your budget has already been set, or it's being set now?
I absolutely am not saying, and I can assure you we are a long way away from being able to, we're dependent on government negotiations to set a balanced budget in Croydon, but we do have a line that relates to this, and until that line is solidified, we cannot finalise it, but exactly what the cost is. I think the suggestion that we pass this budget as it is shown tonight, that gives us all the surety of what we are putting in, but it doesn't stop us reviewing it and making savings against that budget in terms of performance next year, which will end up with the same result. It will just allow us to progress with our internal budget setting processes for those of us that haven't managed to complete them already.
I would be interested to, I mean, I would be curious to know what the timescales actually are and if it was doable, because Andrea had said earlier that she'd already gone through this options appraisal internally. If these options are already sitting somewhere, surely we can see them and make that decision ourselves as to whether or not we want them to be included in the budget.
If it can be done that quickly, fine. I mean, I guess in some ways I'm going on my experience of local government in terms of how quickly we tend to be able to do things. Being honest,
I think just on experience, I think that there are a lot of people involved in budgeting processes at councils, and therefore I'm thinking that if we make our waste team, for example, have probably, they have submitted a budget. It has been approved. I'm assuming they'll be working on the assumptions of numbers submitted by the South London Waste Partnership already. They wouldn't have been assuming that we would not set a budget, and that as a consequence of that, the actual amount that they would have to put in the budget would increase. So therefore, we create problems for ourselves when in fact the outcome that we're seeking is rigorous analysis of the work of the South London Waste Partnership, and if there is an opportunity for reducing that expense. And I think whether setting the budget tonight doesn't stop us doing that really. Whereas I think if we go with the other option, it just creates a lot more problems and work for people who are already working quite hard, I think.
Councillor Christie?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think I appreciate those views from colleagues from other boroughs who are going through the same process we are. I suppose my sort of feeling is just significant discomfort at agreeing a budget that I haven't been involved in challenging in the way that I have with the rest of Merton Council's expenditure. But I equally, you know, I don't want to get us in a situation where we are causing further problems for, you know, our officers or, you know, our colleagues on the panel. So I kind of want to make sure that if we were to agree the budget that's before us tonight, that it is with significant, certainly for my part, a significant level of discomfort about the process of setting this and the desire to in year look at it and look at how underspends could be achieved, or, you know, because I'm not particularly happy about it.
Okay, fair enough. So, okay, as a compromise then, should we pass the budget? But if we say, let's not say 6 months, we say maybe 3 months, we could have an extraordinary meeting where we discuss savings that have been brought forward. That way, we've all set our budgets, and if we do an underspend on those budgets, then all of us have a little bit more breathing room in our own councils. So how about we set that timetable a bit tighter, and if we need to have an extraordinary meeting to discuss the budget just by itself and go, you know, option by option, so that the public can be at least clear on what those options are. We've done that due diligence, and we can at least allay any fears that we're missing something here. Councillor Sweeney, and then Councillor Lewis, and then Councillor Cummings.
Yeah, can you just add in some of the suggestion around the workshops and the opportunities to review this? I mean, I think certainly officers responsible for waste will have views, and I'll be interested in what their views are, as well as other members of the committee.
Yeah, sure. Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent compromise. The only thing I'd request is, if we are to have an emergency meeting, we try and fit it within the the actual existing cycle of meetings. So let fit it in as an item rather than a whole new meeting, because I think it will get too complicated then, I think, because we've got to
I may disagree with you on that one, but I'll come back to it. Councillor Cummings.
Yeah, I agree completely with the suggestion you've made, but I think what we should do is note for subsequent years that the time for us to do this challenge is earlier.
Yes, absolutely. I'm about to say that.
So that we arrive at this point
knowing exactly what to say.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good. Let's note that down then. And as I said, we have the review of our constitution as well, so maybe we can put that into this. So I think we've landed at. We'll pass tonight's budget, for fear of not passing it and having a more expensive budget that gets passed, which none of us want. We will go through a challenge process over the next quarter. Let's say, so that as a robust target, with savings coming forward from officers ranging from very easy to very hard. We will then have maybe an extraordinary meeting to discuss those options. I think it's worth us being able to do that, especially in public. And then we will try and deliver some savings against the budget that we passed. We need to make a note for our constitution that this conversation needs to happen a lot earlier. So perhaps we need to review the cycle of these meetings and work out how to do that in a more timely fashion. Great. And if we did want to do any kind of workshopping, I think online and is the best way to do it, but it might not necessarily be something we need to do. I just think that having the options appraisal is the most key thing, really. Councillor Lewis?
Yeah, just to avoid any confusion, should we probably just have a clear vote to say that we are agreeing the budget rather, so, because.
All those in favour of the budget? Agreed? Great. Okay. Well, thank you for the discussion. I think it was helpful anyway. We're learning lots today. Okay, so we're going to move on to contract performance. And we're going back to Andrea.
Me again, thank you. Yes, this is the contract performance report, and it provides joint committee with an update on the performance of the transfer, treatment, recycling and disposal services that fall under the remit of the Joint Waste Committee and are procured by the South London Waste Partnership and managed on behalf of the 4 partner boroughs. The services that we report are food and green waste services, household reuse and recycling centre services, and also the residual waste treatment services. And this report is a Q2 report, so it covers 1st of April to the 30th of September. So as usual, as background, you've got from 1.1 to 1.4 of the report. We cover what is the 2008 Viridor food and green waste contracts. They obviously expired. We discussed this, as I said, in last committee. They expired in August. 1.5 gives you some background on the new food and green waste contracts. So we've got 4 contracts now in place that replaced the 2008. We've got Biocollectors Limited, an AD facility in Merton. We've got Olico, who collect and treat food waste from the Villiers Road site. Country Style, also collecting and treating green waste from Villiers Road. And the Sewage Recycling and Recovery contract, which receives and transports both green and food waste from our collection services. 1.6, you've got a summary and a background of the HRC service that is covered in, like I say, 1.6. 1.7 is the background to our residual waste treatment contract. So in terms of performance, that summary starts at part 2 of the report. As I said, we've already discussed food and green waste haul and also food and green waste treatment services that were held with Viridor Energy. They expired in August 22. There were no issues to report in relation to these services, and they transferred over on the 31st of August with no issues. Section 4, obviously we've got more detail there about the 4 new treatment, green and food waste treatment contracts. One thing I wanted to point out that I've highlighted is 4.6 is the green and food waste volumes. We've actually seen a reduction, a continued decrease over the reporting period when compared to the same period last year. So that is a 22% reduction in green waste, likely due to the very hot summer that we had, and also a 12% drop in food waste. Section 5 of the report, we cover performance of the HRC services. Points to pick out. 5.6, at the end of Q2, the combined performance at our 6 HRC sites was 66%. And our analysis shows that generally all sites have seen a drop in tonnes when compared again to the same period last year. So the most notable reductions, Kimpton Parkway and Fisher's Farm in Croydon, have seen a 31% and 19% drop respectively. Garth Road in Merton and Factory Lane in Croydon have seen the smallest drop in tonnes with just 3 and 1%. Residual waste generally across all 6 sites was lower, with 9% lower than the same period last year. This is correlates with tonnage data that we've got from the curbside as well, reducing. And again, at the CA sites, there was a significant drop in green waste tonnes during the reporting period. We are always looking at improvement projects at the HRC sites. So we've detailed a number of improvement projects that we've talked about before in this meeting, but they continue. I've just given you an update on each of those. One that I wanted to pick out tonight was at 6.6, and that was the Christmas toy giveaway that we ran at the sites. And it was a really, really good event. It was basically the staff worked really hard to collect and intercept donations of toys that people were throwing away, toys that were actually usable, some still in the packaging. And so what they did is they collected up all of those items and they undertook a toy giveaway. And we also had a suggestion from Merton to to actually interact with some charities and voluntary organisations, and that was part of that toy giveaway, and it was really, really well received. And I've just listed a couple of the charities and the voluntary organisations that benefited from that, and we've had some really lovely feedback. So really, really pleased with that event. Part 7 of the report, we talk about the residual waste treatment contract. In terms of contract performance, we've delivered just over 8,000 tonnes less than the same period last year. That equates to a 7.7% drop in residual waste tonnes. So that's a really positive downward movement. And also in the reporting period, 100% of the residual waste was diverted from landfill. Table, continuing with performance at the ERF, we've got a table at 7.6, and that provides a summary of the emissions. And as we discussed earlier, on the 23rd, there was one further exceedance, and 23rd of the 12th of the HCI, and that was waste composition caused a peak despite the lime dosing was the cause submitted by Viridor. Again, we talked about this earlier, transparency of emissions data. We're not aware of any other facility that presents information around emissions that in such a transparent way as we do at the Beddington ERF, and we're really, really proud of the site that we've got and the accessibility to that information for the public. Then finally at 7.9, we provided an update on the Viridor's environment permit variation application. So to recap, on the 23rd of December 21, Viridor submitted a further application to the Environment Agency to increase the capacity at the ERF by a further 10%. So since writing this report, the consultation obviously has closed, and I believe the EA received over 500 responses. So really, really pleased with the work that all of the boroughs have done in raising awareness for this consultation. Obviously, the partnership also submitted a response. 7.12, I've just very briefly detailed the next steps. So if following this first consultation process, the EA reaches the decision that they are minded to issue the permit variation, a second phase of consultation will start. It follows a similar pattern to the timescale of the initial consultation. And so I put further details are provided in the communications report on that. So the recommendation is to note the comments, note the report and to the contents of the report and to make any comments, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Any comments? Councillor Roche.
Thank you for the report. My question was about the data against Purley Oaks and Villas Road. They're the front runners for recycling rates according to the data. And I just wanted to know what separates those two sites compared to the others, and basically what's being done differently at those sites, and because most of the others are performing in the early to mid 60s, and overall the statistics look very stable. So I think that's the level of what they are at the moment. So I just want to know what more we could do at the other sites, and also obviously to continue to improve at the current front runner sites. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so Purley Oaks and Villiers, notably, they have high percentage of green waste recycling at those sites. We largely believe it's the demographics in terms of so Purley Oaks, for example, is quite a small site, and it has some limitations on vans and trailers because of its size due to health and safety reasons. But yeah, so I believe it's very much a demographics and demographics issue factor that contributes to that higher recycling rates at those two sites. In terms of what we can do at the other sites to improve, we're always looking at ways that we can improve. One of the things that I think I did pick out in the report is the success of the curbside collection of green waste. Now, that has seen a significant shift in green waste tonnes away from the HRRC sites to the curbside over the last few years. The more we promote that curbside service, the less material people take to the HRC site. Now, you know, environmentally speaking, one vehicle picking up multiple loads is far better than individual residents visiting the site, but it does have an impact on the recycling levels at the site. So in some respects, we do have to consider that holistic picture when we look at the performance of sites. So it is very much driven by those key materials. Wood waste, for example, and green waste are one of they're two key contributors to recycling. Green waste, from memory, I'm not as close to the data as I was, but from memory, I believe it's over a third. It contributes to over a third of recycling rates generally at HRC sites. So that's the sheer, you know, significance of that. And wood waste is a similar percentage.
I'm just getting conscious of time, so if we keep our questions and our answers
Sorry.
succinct, that would
Sorry.
be great. Councillor Christie.
Thank you. Yeah, so you mentioned, and I think it's 4.6, you mentioned about the sort of reductions in green waste and food waste, and it's the food waste one in particular. I just wondered whether later in the agenda there's the waste composition analysis, and I think that mentioned that there was about 30% of that was found to be food waste that could have been recycled. And I just wondered whether you're able to tell if that translates across, and if you're able to tell if that that 30% represents any sort of increase, if it's essentially a situation of less food waste being produced and therefore recycled, or if it's actually less food waste being recycled as opposed to put in regular waste.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's really difficult to answer because we've only just started to gather all of this data, and that's the wonderful thing about the waste composition analysis. We'll have that very that borough-wide view on how much material is in the bin, what activities we do, and what actual impact that has, and whether it's actually people producing less or recycling less. Whilst we don't know the answer, instinctively, it's a bit like the chart that John showed earlier, that COVID year, we are comparing things with COVID, you know, that kind of coming out of COVID. And COVID, there was a lot of people were staying at home, so they were producing more waste. They were producing more, and I believe more food waste. So it's difficult to really say with absolute certainty what the cause is. I would hope it's a result of our waste minimization and our awareness campaigns, and I would hope it's the result of people becoming more, as they separate their food, becoming more aware of and more conscious of the amount of food that we potentially waste. So I would hope it's a reduction, but as I say, now we've got that waste composition data, we'll be able to talk about that with far more confidence. And also, I think you talk about it as well. We do targeted food waste campaigns, and that's when you get the real understanding of the data and the impact of what we do as well.
Councillor Bulmer.
Sorry, I just want to ask a question I asked earlier from a slightly different angle, because it often crops up, but the emissions from the incinerator, and noting that they are well below the Environment Agency limits generally, but presumably one can have confidence that these limits were set using the latest science. So one can presumably feel very confident that these limits are set at a level where we can be confident that it's not a worry to one's health.
Absolutely, as John said earlier, the Environment Agency will set the 30-minute units for each of the emissions, with the exception of one emission, which is measured in a different, but they'll set that at what they deem to be a safe level. Now that it's a 30-minute test, as John said, they're testing at the stack every 10 seconds, but those levels are set as safe levels. Now, more than 99% of the time, the ERF is running within, and as you say, in some of the instances, well within that deemed safe level. And they're momentary spikes. So absolutely, those levels are set by the Environment Agency as safe levels.
Councillor Roche.
So I wanted to ask just a bit more about the toy giveaway. So one of them is at Factory Lane. That's That's in Croydon. I just wanted to know, is that going to be expanded and repeated? Because it sounds like it's a success. And do we know the numbers of who took part in that? Because it will be interesting for us to understand how successful it was, especially because Factory Lane's in one of our deprived parts of Croydon, and I would imagine a lot of people benefited from that.
Yes, so to answer the first question, absolutely. We are looking at what I want to look at with Veolia is not only repeating it for next Christmas, but actually how do we do something more frequent? You know, is there enough supply of good quality toys that we can actually link up with charities and organizations to actually have that steady flow rather than just waiting for Christmas. So absolutely there is, we've already had contact from a number of people and organizations requesting that we repeat it next year. So there's definitely a demand for it, and absolutely we want to do it again. And as I say, we want to build on that and make it more of a regular consistent outlet for these toys.
I think one of the things on that though, would kind of challenge back to the partnership is that not everyone has a car and not everyone can get to the tip. So especially in Merton, we don't really have the space to have that kind of facility. So joining up with places like Salvation Army and having it actually in the community is kind of where we would like to get to. Did you have a follow-up question? Sorry.
That was developed and mentioned at the last one with where you could scan and see where you could take items for recycling. Would it be worthwhile linking with those sorts of sites to promote the scheme and where they could possibly collect some of the toys, as you said, to expand away from just the recycling centres themselves? I don't know, because I mentioned last time about the QR codes and how it could be good to promote on stickers, and that was going to be one of my questions actually. Is are we doing? Has that been taken up? Have we looked into that? Because I think it's an easy way of using stickers and being able to modify the information without having to replace the stickers, especially if it's a continuous update. And another, if I come, is this about the comms report as well? Is this a separate item on the agenda? Okay. Because I was going to ask about.
But why don't we move on to the comms report and then we can get right into it. But just again, with the interest of time, can we skip through the kind of headlines, because we've still got the waste composition analysis as well, and there are clearly questions. So yeah.
Onto the comms report. Okay. And Councillor Roche, I've got some photos actually I can share with you from the event, so you can see that it was a nice event. You're right. So yeah, the comms report. Let me just highlight a few key bits for you in here. The first bit I wanted to cover was, well, I was going to talk about the toy giveaway event, but I feel like we've done that. So no, it's fine. If we move to paragraph 2.6 in my report, this is the promotion of the community reuse shops. This is something that we talked about at the last committee meeting. There was a sort of a keenness amongst members to do more, particularly to promote the new shop in Croydon. So we have produced a short promotional film promoting the reuse shops. The filming took place on the 16th of December. I seem to remember it was about -7, so it wasn't the most pleasant of filming days, but anyway, it was a nice bright day, so that was good. And we're just doing the final editing on that, so those films will be ready and they'll be with your borough comms teams in the next week or two to start pushing that out. So so that's some good news there. Moving on to section 3, which is the ERF. I talk at 3.3 about the permit variation. Andrea's already covered that, so I won't go into any great detail. The only thing I would say is that I have had confirmation from the EA that they did get over 500 responses. I don't think that's normal for them. I think that's quite a lot, so they are taking a bit of time to go through all of that. As Andrea said, if they do, having looked at all of the evidence, and they may need to go back to Viridor and seek further clarification based on issues raised by people in the consultation, they will then come to a decision, and if they're minded to award or to agree the permit variation, there would be another phase of consultation called the minded to agree consultation. But I have been told by the EA that that will be at least 2 months away. So just to give you a bit of a time frame, I wouldn't be surprised if it was longer than that, but it would certainly not be within the next 2 months because they're working through those 500 responses. At 3.10, I talk about the gas bottle campaign. We mentioned this briefly at the last meeting, but I wanted to give you some more details on what's being done. Lots of sort of a multi-pronged approach on this. You know, Viridor have launched their campaign, which I talk about in here, and there's going to be further phases of that over the next couple of months, just sort of raising awareness of the issue with residents. We've also done a lot with the frontline staff, Veolia, Ida Verde, grounds and parks maintenance staff, collection crews, providing them refreshed and updated guidance on what they should be doing when they come across these bottles to make sure they don't end up in the residual waste streams. Training with the crews at the ERF operating the bunker cranes to help them to identify better these bottles and isolate and pull them out. And I think we mentioned last time that Viridor are also planning to trial some artificial intelligence camera technology in the bunker as well to help those crane operators identify those bottles. And finally, Viridor are leading on it, but we're supporting them with a sort of a lobbying campaign to try and get the commercial sales of these nitrous oxide bottles banned, so that they can only be used for what they're intended for, which is mainly catering industry. There was a Westminster Roundtable event in the diary actually just before Christmas, and Councillor Irons was going to be going as a representative, but it had to be moved because of train strike, which is rather disappointing. But I know Viridor are very keen to get that rescheduled soon, and that's going to have local MPs there. It's going to have people from Resolve, which is the substance misuse charity as well, because obviously that's the other angle to this is the health concerns of the people that are using these nitrous oxide bottles as well. So there's a bit of information there on that. And then finally, section 4 covers collections and street cleansing. I always make the point that it's not strictly in the remit of this committee, but I like to tell you what we're doing, because I think that the two things are very relate and overlap. So 4.2 provides some figures on the garden waste promotional campaign, which I mentioned earlier. So you can see we targeted just under 90,000 properties with the campaign, £52,000 cost, but we managed to get 3,000 new subscribers with a conversion rate of 3.36%. So once that income is shared with Veolia, that gives us an income of £109,012, which is just a touch more than what was in the budget paper. And it gives us a return on investment of just over £4 for every £1 spent. So good results, I think. What we did do really well this year was not just targeted properties, but split them out into different types of targets, and we can see from that where our conversion rates are high and where they're lower, and that's why I think that whilst I think we should spend a little bit more money again next year on a garden waste campaign, but I'm sure that's one of the things that will be scrutinised in the workshop that we'll be having. We don't need as much again, because every time you run a campaign like this, obviously the number of potential new subscribers goes down. So I think we can be even more targeted next year and get a good return with a lower investment. Paragraphs 4.4 talk about the food waste minimisation and recycling campaign. There are two phases to this. The first one was in September. That was around minimisation. And that was putting some food waste minimisation stickers on people's food waste bins to try and get them to reduce their food waste. The second phase was a bigger one, which was around recycling participation. That targeted 50,000 properties. And there was a range of things we did, provided some free liners, stickers on the residual waste bins, and a leaflet through the door. So we are currently we're doing participation monitoring on those rounds that were targeted, and we're looking at the tonnage data so that we can assess the impact that campaign has had, and I'll report that to the next committee. I talk at 4.8 about the annual collection calendars that were produced and shared with the boroughs, 86 versions of that in total across the partnership, and also the recycling newsletters that went to every property across the partnership region. And I appended those at the back of the report just so that you can see what went out across all of the boroughs. And then I think 4.11 talks about a plastics campaign that we're going to be running in the next couple of months with a focus on carbon. So that's something to look forward to. That's coming up. And then I go on to talk about the Veolia contract extension decision. Obviously, you all know that during October and November in all of your boroughs, your committees made a decision not to extend the existing contract with Veolia. So a lot of work went on behind the scenes to kind of support the boroughs with the messaging around that. And then leading on from that, we're now going through a process where we're supporting each of the boroughs with your sort of co-design consultation with residents. So that's looking at what residents want from the services in the future, which will obviously complement the information I provided earlier, which is more kind of reflective around views and opinions of existing services. So I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Roche and then Councillor Walmer. And again, just keep it short. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wanted just to discuss a bit more about the gas bottle detection. You mentioned about AI, that sounds quite interesting. Do we know a timescale for that? Because I think that could be quite a good way forward. And are we going to be monitoring obviously monitoring the progress of their continued ambition to lower to lower the spikes in the incidents? And do we have because in the report it says that it went up significantly. Do we have the data to show what it was before and after? Like what they were saying was normal and then significant? In terms of the detection. Thank you.
I think Simon, I wish Simon was here because I know he spoke to Viridor recently about the technology.
Yesterday, yeah. So I know they've been doing more investigations. They've been doing some market research. They've gone over to Europe, haven't they, just to look at technology already in place. So they are going through that process, how quickly they decide on a technology to install for the bunker. We haven't got a confirmed date yet, but it is in their interest as well, you know, as they are absolutely committed and want to undertake this project. So you know, I'm sure as soon as they've decided on the technology, but yeah, they've just recently done a visit to Europe just to see it already in action in another facility.
Councillor Walmer and then Councillor Lewis, please.
In fact, the very question I was going to ask has just been asked, but obviously I realise there are several approaches to dealing with these gas bottles, but before we get to artificial intelligence, is there a trajectory downwards in the detection rate at the moment? Sorry, is the detection increasing as we go, or is it flatlining?
Yeah, and also to pick up your earlier question about how does this compare, I think this kind of came a bit out of nowhere. These nitrous oxide bottles, these larger ones. I think the tiny canisters that we've seen around on grass verges for years, I'm sure they've been going through, but they're small enough not to cause an issue. And of course, they're single use, so they're discharged, and the ones that come through are empty. The problem with these bigger canisters is that the valve on them, it's much easier. You know, if you use it for a couple of turns, I'm not familiar with how this works, I'm afraid, but then yeah, and then you throw it away, it could well still have some compressed gas in it. So that's the issue. And my understanding is that this literally sort of came out almost out of nowhere, so kind of May, June time last summer.
Yeah.
In terms of, is it working, is it getting better? We've certainly seen a reduction in exceedances because of it. We know they're still pulling them out, perhaps not quite in the quantities they were. I suspect, and we'll start to see a pattern as time goes on, but there may be a seasonal nature to this, in that the summer, you know, months when people are hanging around in parks doing what they do, I suspect we may well see a sort of a seasonal element to this. So before we say, yes, we think we're getting better at this, let's just wait for next May and June and see what happens.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, it's with the canisters. Again, like most people, I hadn't seen them until I went to the ERF and I was showed a sample, but now subsequently I've actually seen them on the streets and what have you. So question I've got, and it also relates to the advertising campaign. I don't think the advertising campaign was the best, but one of the questions it failed to answer is, what should members of the public do when they see or when they have one of these items? Because unfortunately they are now on the streets, you can pick them up. You know, what do? Do we chuck them in the public waste bin? Probably answer no. What should we advise people to do with them?
Yeah, it's a good question, because just as this issue came out of nowhere a bit for people like Viridor, it's also come out of nowhere for a bit for people like us as well, in terms of what is the right outlet for it. So so the challenge with the campaign, Viridor were keen to start getting the message out there as soon as possible for obvious reasons. They're under huge pressure from us to get these exceedances down. They're under huge pressure from, you know, their bosses, because these incidents can cause damage to the facility, for example. So they wanted to get this out as quickly as possible, which is understandable. The challenge we have in terms of providing an alternative is that obviously the thing we would like to say is take it to your HRC is the easiest one, but there is an issue at the moment with some of our HRCs around licensing and whether they can actually accept these things. Now, there's been a lot of work going on in the background with partnership officers and the EA to get some to get permission to accept these, and I think we're making.
Really good
I keep
progress.
thinking
Yeah,
we're really
yep,
close.
yep, yep.
And I think we are really close. And as soon as that permission comes through, we'll be updating the campaign artwork to make that call to action much clearer. Unfortunately, at the moment, all we can say is, don't put it in your bin and, go to the retailer, which would be a lovely thing to say. But the reality is we know a lot of these things are bought on Amazon, etc. So it's not as easy as it might be with a Calagas bottle to take it back. So I appreciate it's not an ideal situation, but I'm really hoping that within the next few weeks, hopefully, we can put a much more positive call to action in terms of what residents should be doing with these bottles.
Okay, any more comments? Okay then. I just to say that I think, on terms of the permit variation, the fact that with these things are unmanageable, I think it proves that we shouldn't be increasing this permit, given that we haven't got a system in place to manage this kind of thing that is so causing these spikes and causing these exceedances. Until those things come under control, I think we don't need to be extending their permit. Councillor Lewis, did you have a point?
Quickly, just for clarity, really, when you said we shouldn't be granting the permit, or I can't remember the terminology used, but just to make it very clear, it's the Environment Agency,
Thank you for the clarity. Yes, the Environment Agency should not be increasing their permit, and I think our opposition to it should be very firm, considering they can't yet work out how to stop getting these things through the ERF. Okay, so if that's all, should we move on to item 10, which is the second to last one, because I still want to just quickly talk about the constitution. So can we get through the waste composition analysis relatively quickly, John?
Quicker than my previous presentation, Chair. Yes, absolutely. So, and we can be quick with this, I think, because at the last committee, of course, I came and presented the interim findings after phase 1. This is just coming back. I wanted to just, give you a full update now that phase 2 has happened. So it was conducted by Resource Futures, who are a specialist consultancy. There were 2 phases, as I say, conducted in different seasons, which is good practice because waste does differ across seasons. Covered all waste streams apart from garden waste, so it did include food and it included recycling. You can see over 35 tonnes of waste was hand sifted through and sorted into various different categories. So it's a pretty big operation. 1,500 odd curb. You'll see the term curbside. That basically means houses. People have got their own bins. About 1,500 of those were included in the sample, and flatted property flats or communal service, people that share their bins, there was just under 1,000. So it was a big project. They weren't random households. Again, they were sampled to be demographically representative of your boroughs as a whole. And this is a really robust approach. And as you can see, it gives us a maximum standard error of plus or minus 3% at the partnership level, or if you're looking at the borough level, it's around 6%, slightly different for each borough, but it's around 6%. In terms of the sampling, this is that brilliant LOAC map that I really love. It's a really fascinating map, actually. So this is what we use to get that representative sample. It's called the London Area Output Classification System, and it's a GLA system, and it uses 60 census variables to group people or group small pockets of London into one of 8 categories. And you can see there that it produces quite an interesting patchwork of London, and you can zoom in on sort of your areas and your street and see which category you fit into. And what we get from that, basically, looking at the houses, the curbside sample first, we actually sampled across the partnership region across 7 LOAC groups in total that represented 98% of the partnership population. So that was a really good mix. And then on flats is much more difficult from an operational perspective because you have to have an RCV. You can't. The houses, they collect it in a van, in a big like Luton van, the rubbish. But flats, because they're big, 1,100 bins, you have to get an RCV, and it has to be dedicated for this project. So it's a bit more challenging. But we had 6 LOAC groups representing 88% of the population for flats. So what did we find? So looking at residual waste first, this is arisings. This is kind of kilograms per household per week. You can see it's broadly similar between communal and curbside. It's an average of 4.63 kilograms per household per week. Houses produce slightly more waste than flats, surprisingly, not really. And the waste that is in houses waste contains slightly less recyclable materials. So houses produce slightly more waste, but they are slightly better at recycling than flats. I think we probably all knew that, but it's kind of useful to see it in data, isn't it? So that we're not just assuming it, we actually know it. There's quite a lot. You'll see other is quite a big one. I think other is that purple bar. And the majority of that is absorbent hygiene products, which would be things like sort of nappies and incontinence products, and pet waste, including things like sort of cat litter, etc. So that's the chief bit, and other. Oh, and just one other point really quickly on that one, because just remember, this is weight, a lot of this. So although food waste looks huge compared to, for example, the grey or the dark green of plastic film, if you think about weight and how much plastic film you would have to get that much weight in a bin, you know, in terms of volumes, you're looking at much more plastic film than you are food waste. It's just food waste is so heavy. That's the issue. But of course, our recycling rates are based on tonnage and our gate fees are based on tonnage. So the weight of food waste is a real issue for us. In terms of looking at that residual waste in a bit more detail, you can see just over half of it was recyclable using curbside services. The biggest chunk of that was food waste, 29.2%. Of that, 12.5% was still in its packaging. So people had thrown it away without even taking out the packaging. So that's obviously something that we need to look at. Quite a lot of container mix in there. That's plastics, glass, cans, cartons, and paper and card. Only 1/3 or less than a third, 28.8% of that residual waste is truly difficult to recycle. So it shows you, even though we're doing really well with our recycling rates, it shows you how much opportunity there is left. We looked at the impact of future legislation changes. And basically what this is showing us is that the deposit return scheme, the likely impact on our residual waste is very low, but extended producer responsibility, which is around getting producers to bear the cost of treating and collecting recycling, is very high. You can see about 20% of what's in our residual waste would fall under the scope of that scheme. There's lots of information in the report which is included, which has been shared with all of your boroughs about capture rates. You can see overall paper and card, we're capturing around 2/3 of all of the paper and card, and container mix is a little higher at 70%. We're doing really well with glass bottles and cans, but we're doing far less well with things like foil and aerosols. So that's helpful. It means that we know what we can focus on. Yeah, you can see here that plastics is still confusing people. So less than half of pots, tubs and trays are being captured, but capture rates for bottles is much, much higher. It's not on this graph, but in terms of food waste, we are looking at around 50 to 60% capture rate for food across the boroughs. So we're capturing quite a decent amount of food waste. But like I say, the problem is it's so heavy that it still makes up 1/3 of what's in our residual waste bins. So that's quite interesting, I think. In terms of recycling composition, a few headlines here. The quality of recycling collected from houses is generally very good. There's low levels of contamination. Quality of recycling from flats is significantly lower. It's about 2 to 4 times higher in terms of contamination, depending on waste stream. But a significant contributor to this is that flats that are using twin stream collections, so they're collecting paper and card and container mix separately, people are just putting the wrong recycling in the wrong bin. So it's not, so in the container mix bin, a lot of the contamination is paper and card and vice versa. So perhaps that suggests that commingled collections for flats is better because it means that you will have lower contamination rates. But of course, that gives you a bit more of a challenge in terms of MRFs and off-takers because the quality of recycling you collect is slightly lower. So there's pros and cons to that approach. And then we just looked at the impact of legislation change here as well. Again, you can see that EPR, extended producer responsibility, again, will have a significant impact on the waste. But here you can see this is where deposit return scheme could also potentially have quite a big impact. So 9% of what's in our container mix recycling would fall under potentially under the deposit return scheme. So that could mean quite a lot of that waste is no longer put in bins, it's taken to these reverse vending machines for people to get their 20p rewards, etc. So that's quite a big chunk, so it's worth bearing in mind. So in terms of the next steps for this, there's loads of data. There's a huge Excel spreadsheet sitting behind this that you can drill down to at borough level, at LOAC level, lots of really fantastic information there to help you plan your services going forward. We're also going to use it to target our behaviour change campaigns more effectively, model the impact of future legislation changes, and it will enable us to more accurately calculate the carbon impact of our residual waste treatment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, now that was a lot of information. So just to round up, we need to get better at doing food waste, recycling, and we've got an issue with recycling in flats. Any questions? Councillor Roche?
I just wanted to ask a bit more about what more we could do with food waste, because in my impression, certainly in Croydon, was that we were not very good at doing food waste, but you were saying that we were capturing quite a high number of that. So my question is, what more can we do to, because it's 29% is obviously quite substantial, isn't it, in those figures that you were presenting?
That's across the partnership though, isn't it? Not just Croydon.
So between 50 and 60%, I should have said that's for houses, not for flats. So we didn't. So I suspect for flats, it will be a bit lower than that. What can we do? We're running big campaigns. You know, we ran a campaign this year targeting 50,000 properties. We've got quite a big chunk in the budget for next year, should it be approved, to target more properties around recycling participation and minimisation. So I think there's a lot we can do. I suspect that financial implications might kick in as well over the next few years. You know, houses will be more motivated to waste less on food, because there's a big financial message here as well in terms of food waste and how much money people are throwing away, particularly with that packaged food. It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah. So I think, you know, we will be pushing on an open door over the next few years, I suspect. So I think that will help. But and the other thing to say is Resource Futures do this all over the country. This is their thing. And they said that our waste was looking really good, really healthy waste, apparently. So, you know, I think we're starting from a good foundation, but there's clearly a huge opportunity to do more there, I think.
Anybody else?
So I'll take them offline with you. But can I just check the 4.6 ton figure, 4.6 kilo figure that was quoted earlier? Yeah. That's the average weekly household waste per house. That's residual waste.
Residual waste.
It just, my very quick maths showed that gave each household roughly a quarter of a ton of waste per year.
Right.
And in Sutton, we've got roughly 80,000 properties, and that only gives us 20,000 tons of waste rather than 40,000 tons.
4.68 for houses, 4.55 for flats.
But they're very rough figures.
Yeah.
I get 20,000 rather than 40,000.
Okay, I'll have to go and double check, but I'll come back to you on that.
And my maths is, I didn't do it to 18, so you know.
No.
Okay, any other questions? The only point I'd like to kind of just say is, well, this issue of flats and recycling and providing places for people to recycle properly is going to become more and more of an issue as we have more and more flats, and also we have more and more conversions. And it just feels like there isn't nobody seems to have cracked it yet. And I just wonder, how do we learn from countries that have cracked it?
Yes. We're working closely with Re-London on this, because it's not a local issue, it's a national and regional issue. I think it is really challenging. I actually think there's some quite encouraging signs in here in terms of, like I say, I think for me, a lot of it is just confusion, not a kind of I don't want to do it. So I think the challenge that we've got is that we need to do it on a block by block basis, because there's no one size fits all. Every block is so different. They were built across different times. Some of them are well suited for different bins. Some of them aren't. There's space issues. There's all sorts of issues. And I think it's going to take quite a lot of investment in terms of, you know, people and money to get it right. But I think that's what we probably need to start doing is we're also planning next year to develop a pack for managing agents, because I think there will be some managing agents that are much keener to work with us than others. And I think let's at least start working with the ones that are up for it and want to do the right thing. So we're going to develop a pack. We're working, Bromley have done something similar last year, and we're going to use theirs as a kind of a starting point, which will give managing agents lots more help and advice and guidance in terms of how to get their recycling right. And I think in terms of our planning, we need to make sure that there's proper thought go into that, so that any new flats that are built at least have got good provision for recycling.
Okay, is that everyone's happy? Okay, well, then I think we'll draw that item to a close, and just then to go on to the final item, which is on the procedural rules. And we had a bit of a mix up today in terms of people being allowed to speak, and whether or not that was part of the constitution, and whether or not there is a mechanism for that. So I think we just need some clarity. As this has gone from borough to borough, certain things have been tagged on, certain things have been tagged off. So I think it's time just to have a bit of a house clean. So the proposal is that officers will come back with a constitution that we can all agree, and at our next meeting we can then discuss and vote on or adopt, just to kind of clarify where we are, because it's very confusing right now. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, thank you very much for your time this evening. Have safe journeys home, and take care. Bye-bye.